The July Arizona sun was beating down mercilessly on the East Valley prison complex, turning the concrete walls into hot slabs. The air inside the women's cell block C was thick and stifling, despite the humming of industrial fans that did little more than move the hot currents from place to place. At 5 o'clock in the morning, the prison was still in a deep slumber. Only the footsteps of infrequent guards echoed through the deserted corridors. Derek Washington, a 37-year-old guard, was finishing his night shift. His tall figure moved with the practiced slowness of a man who knows his shift is almost over 15 years in the system, had made his face impenetrable, with only the occasional slip of emotion in his dark eyes, which he quickly suppressed. Today there was tension in them. Derek approached cell 238. He slowed his step, listening. Usually Letitia Jameson woke early and waited for him to make her rounds, sometimes to exchange a glance, sometimes a brief word. But today it was quiet. Derek took a few more steps and peered through the observation window of the cell. The next moment he exhaled sharply, as if he'd been hit in the solar plexus. His hand went to his walkie-talkie. Code 9111, cell 238, cell block C. His voice sounded hoarse but professional. Repeat, code 911. 20 minutes later, the prison yard was filled with the howling of sirens. 2 police cars and a medical examiner's van lined up in front of the administration building. The heavy metal gates opened, letting in the Phoenix Police Department's Criminal Division detectives. Detective Marcus Wilkerson got out of the car first. Tall, broad-shouldered, and wearing an immaculately pressed anthracite-colored suit, he looked out of place in this expanse of concrete and barbed wire. 15 years in homicide hadn't erased the deep humanity that made some of his colleagues think he was too soft. Marcus had seen more death in his 44 years of life than most people see in a lifetime, but each new death still scarred him. Following him out the door was Detective Chanel Davenport. At 32, she was one of the youngest in the department, but had already earned a reputation as an uncompromising and insightful investigator. Short, trim, with short dreadlocks that she'd gathered into a neat bundle, Chanel moved with feline grace and alertness. Her gaze was already scanning the area, memorizing details. "What do we got, Marcus?" she asked, adjusting her jacket. Letitia Jameson, 32 years old, found hanged in her cell around 5 this morning. A guard discovered the body during his rounds. Suicide? At first glance. But I never trust first glances, Marcus replied, heading toward the warden who was greeting them. Raven Paulson, a full-figured woman in her 50s with her lips pressed together, was clearly nervous. For the warden, the death of an inmate always meant extra checks, paperwork, and potential problems. "Detectives," she extended her hand for a formal handshake. "We've already prepared all the paperwork on Jameson. She was serving a 5-year sentence for armed robbery, now in her 3rd year. No suicidal tendencies prior to this case." "Had she had any visitors lately?" Marcus asked, following Paulson through the checkpoint. "No. The last visit was 3 months ago, her cousin. But Jameson was sociable with the other inmates, especially Tamika Brookson from a neighboring unit. They worked together in the laundry room." Chanel was writing something down in a notebook. "And the disciplinary actions?" 2 minor infractions in the last year. One for being late to the cafeteria, the other for filling out a library book request form incorrectly. Nothing serious. They passed through a series of heavy metal doors, each step taking them deeper into the prison maze. The air was becoming increasingly musty. Some of the prisoners were already awake and watching the procession through the small windows in the cell doors. "Who discovered the body?" Marcus asked. "Yes. Derek Washington, he was on duty that night. One of our best employees, 15 years of perfect service," Raven answered too quickly. "He's in the staff room now, waiting for you to interview him." They reached cell 238, where the forensics team was already working. Dr. Rayshawn Coleman, the medical examiner, a tall man with a neatly trimmed beard and a thoughtful look, was conducting the initial examination of the body. Letitia Jameson's body was still hanging from a makeshift noose made from a torn bedsheet. The noose was tied to the top rung of the bunk bed. To hang herself, Letitia had to stand on the edge of the toilet, fasten the noose, and then step into the void. Her bare feet almost touched the floor. "Good morning, detectives," Rayshawn nodded. "Preliminary time of death is between 2 o'clock and 4 a.m. Rigor mortis was just beginning to set in." Marcus scrutinized the cell. The small, claustrophobic space was neat. A few books lay on a shelf. Personal photographs were pinned to the wall above a small metal desk. Toothbrush, toothpaste and other toiletries were neatly arranged. No suicide note? He asked. No, Paulson replied. We checked every possible place. No note, no verbal messages to the other inmates. Chanel moved closer to the body. Letitia was thin, with traces of former attractiveness on her haggard face. Her dark hair was braided into many thin pigtails. No visible signs of struggle at first glance, Rayshawn remarked, pointing to the neck of the deceased. The noose furrow is consistent with a classic hanging, slanted, most pronounced at the front of the neck. Did anyone hear or see anything? Chanel asked, taking her eyes off the body and turning to the warden. The cells on either side are empty, Paulson replied. The cell block was quiet. The night guard didn't notice anything until the body was discovered. I see, Marcus nodded. Dr. Coleman, when can we expect a full report? The body will be sent to the morgue in an hour. I'll try to do the autopsy today and have the results by lunch tomorrow, Rayshawn replied, making notes on his clipboard. Marcus and Chanel left the cell, leaving the forensics team to finish their work. In the hallway, Marcus stopped. I want surveillance footage from the last 24 hours, Jameson's full medical history, including psychological evaluations, and a list of everyone who had access to this cell block last night. Raven Paulson tensed. Detective, on the face of it, this is an apparent suicide. Do you really suspect? On the face of it, yes, Marcus interrupted, but I'd prefer to rule out all possibilities. Of course, Paulson tried to hide her irritation. I'll have all the materials made available to you. They walked down the corridor toward the interrogation room, where the guard who had discovered the body was waiting. Derek Washington sat at a metal desk with his hands folded in front of him. His uniform was impeccably ironed, but there were dark circles under his eyes. He flinched slightly as the detectives entered the room. Mr. Washington, Marcus began, sitting down across from him. Please tell us how you discovered the body. Derek took a deep breath. I did my usual morning rounds. 5 o'clock in the morning as usual. As I approached cell 238, I noticed that inmate Jameson was hanging. His voice trembled slightly. I immediately radioed for backup and entered the cell to check for a pulse, but it was too late. Did you notice anything unusual during your night watch? Chanel asked, scrutinizing the expression on the guard's face. No, it was a quiet night. I went around the block every hour as I should. At 2 in the morning, Jameson was asleep, or at least lying on the bed. Did you know the prisoner well? Marcus asked, noting the way Derek's fingers began tapping on the table. Only professionally, he replied, holding the detective's gaze. Jameson was a quiet inmate, never a troublemaker. She worked in the laundry room, did well. Did she ever express suicidal thoughts? Maybe complained of depression, trouble sleeping? Marcus continued. No, nothing like that. She was... Derek hesitated, searching for a word. Normal, calm. Chanel made a note in her notebook. How long have you been on this block, Mr. Washington? About 3 years. I was transferred here from the men's ward. And how often were you on shift when Letitia Jameson was on this unit? Derek frowned slightly. I didn't count. Regularly, I think. Maybe 3 or 4 shifts a week. Are you aware of any conflicts Jameson may have had with other inmates or staff? Marcus asked. No. Derek shook his head. Like I said, she was calm. The detectives asked a few more questions, but Derek had little to add. His answers were concise and professional, though Chanel noticed how he kept coming back to the phrase, she was calm, as if it was a shield he was hiding behind. After questioning Washington, detectives spoke with 2 other guards on duty that night in other parts of the prison complex. Neither of them noticed anything unusual. Marcus and Chanel then requested a meeting with Tamika Brookson, the deceased's closest friend. Tamika was moved to the visitor's room accompanied by 2 security guards. Tamika Brookson, a 38-year-old woman with a hard stare and a scar crossing her left eyebrow, was incarcerated for armed assault. Her hands were shackled with handcuffs attached to her waistband, but she moved with a certain dignity. Miss Brookson, Marcus began after the guards had left the room. Please accept our condolences for the loss of your friend. Tamika nodded slowly, not taking her eyes off the detective's face. She didn't kill herself, she said without preamble. Marcus and Chanel exchanged glances. What makes you think that? Chanel asked, leaning forward. Letitia isn't like that, Tamika replied firmly. She had plans. She was going to apply for parole in 6 months. Said she had something that would change her life when she got out. What was it? Marcus asked. Tamika shrugged. She didn't say specifically. But the last 2 months had been different, joyful or something. Said things were about to change. When was the last time you saw her? Marcus continued. Yesterday at the laundromat. We worked together from 2 to 5. She was normal, laughed at my jokes, talked about wanting to read some new book. Did she mention any problems? Maybe conflicts with other inmates or guards? Chanel asked. Tamika thought for a moment. No conflicts at all, but she was getting a little nervous when some of the guards were around. What kind of guards? Washington, for example. Tamika said the name with a barely perceptible pause. When he was around, she always somehow tightened up, became more attentive. Was it like fear, Marcus clarified? Not exactly, Tamika thought again. More like she didn't want him to see something in her. I don't know how to explain it. The detectives continued their conversation, but Tamika couldn't or wouldn't give more specific details. She repeated several times that Letitia wasn't suicidal and insisted that her friend had been even more positive than usual lately. After a series of interrogations, Marcus and Chanel gathered their notes and headed for the exit of the prison complex. They stopped briefly in the courtyard, squinting against the bright sunlight. "What do you think?" Chanel asked, putting on her sunglasses. Marcus shook his head. "So far, everything points to suicide. No obvious signs of a struggle, no witnesses, no obvious motive for murder. But the friend's testimony is alarming. If Letitia was really in a good mood making plans..." He didn't finish his thought. "We'll wait for the autopsy results," Chanel summarized, "and the analysis of the surveillance cameras." "Exactly," Marcus nodded. "It's always better to double-check all the facts." They got in the car and drove out of the prison grounds, leaving the gray walls and barbed wire behind. A long day of filling out reports and waiting for forensic results lay ahead. The next morning, Marcus Wilkerson arrived at the office earlier than usual. He hadn't slept well the night before. The image of Letitia Jameson hovering haunted him in his half-sleep. Something about the case kept him awake, though he couldn't articulate exactly what it was. Chanel joined him half an hour later, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "You look like you haven't slept," she remarked, placing one of the cups in front of her partner. "I have," Marcus admitted, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Something doesn't add up in this case, Chanel." "A hunch?" She sat down on the edge of his desk. "You could say that." He sipped his coffee. "Did you look at the security footage?" "Yeah, nothing out of the ordinary. Washington was indeed making rounds every hour, just like he claimed. There was no movement in Jameson's cell from 11 p.m. to 5 a.m. when he discovered the body. And the other guards? Everyone was in their place. No unplanned movements around the cell block." Marcus rubbed his face with his hands. "What about the medical history?" "Nothing remarkable either. Routine checks, no major illnesses. Last psych evaluation was 3 months ago. Concluded emotionally stable, adapted to prison life." Their conversation was interrupted by the phone ringing. Marcus picked up the receiver. "Detective Wilkerson." He listened attentively to his interlocutor, his face gradually becoming more serious. "Got it. We'll be there in 20 minutes. He hung up the phone and looked at Chanel. It was Ray Sean. He has the autopsy results and wants to discuss them in person. "Is it something serious?" "He wouldn't talk on the phone," Marcus answered, getting up and putting on his jacket. "He just said it was important." They quickly left the office and headed for the morgue located in the basement of the Phoenix City Hospital. Dr. Ray Sean Coleman met them at the entrance, his normally calm face unusually tense. "Detectives, thank you for coming so quickly." He led them into his office, closing the door behind him. "I have some data that changes the picture considerably." He spread some files and photos on the desk. Cause of death, asphyxia due to neck compression. At first glance, it looks consistent with hanging. However, there are 2 important points. Ray Sean pointed to a photograph of Letitia's neck, where a ligature mark was visible. "First, on closer inspection, I found minor irregularities in the groove that may indicate that the rope was tightened not only by the weight of the body, but also by additional force." "Do you think she could have been strangled and then staged to commit suicide?" Marcus asked, leaning over to get a better look at the photograph. "It's possible, though I can't say for sure," Ray Sean replied. "But there's something else that doesn't fit the suicide theory." He turned a page in the report. "Letitia Jameson was pregnant, 7 weeks. Marcus and Chanel looked at each other. "Are you sure?" Marcus asked. "Absolutely," Ray Sean nodded. "I personally ran all the tests. There's no doubt about it." Chanel tapped her pen thoughtfully on her notebook. "That makes a lot of difference." Now her friend's words about Letitia being in a good mood and having plans take on new meaning. "And Anne raises the question of the child's father," Marcus added. In a women's prison, that severely limits the pool of suspects. Exactly, Rayshawn agreed. Although theoretically she could have gotten pregnant before her incarceration or during some kind of vacation, but the timing, 3 months ago was the last visit, Chanel reminded herself, reviewing her notes. 7 weeks is less than 2 months, unless there were other visits that we don't know about. Or, Marcus looked at her, it was someone on the prison staff. There aren't many men on staff, mostly guards and a few administrative staff, Chanel pointed out. And access to the women's block is restricted. We need to go back to the prison, Marcus said firmly. This information completely changes the investigation. They thanked Rayshawn for the information and quickly left the morgue. On the way back to the jail, Marcus called Captain Ja'Cory Taylor to report the new circumstances and to request an official change in the status of the case from suspected suicide to suspicious death. Captain Taylor, a seasoned police officer with 30 years of experience, listened to the report and gave the green light to expand the investigation. Proceed with caution, he warned. The prison authorities won't be happy that you're digging deeper. It's easier for them to dismiss the case as a suicide. I understand, sir, Marcus replied. But the facts point to a possible murder. Then follow the facts, detective. Keep me informed. When they arrived at East Valley Prison, Raven Paulson greeted them with ill-concealed irritation. Detectives, I thought we had already completed all the necessary procedures yesterday. We have some new information, Miss Paulson, Marcus said. We'd like to talk to a few more people. Paulson pressed her lips into a thin line. What kind of information? The autopsy results showed that Letitia Jameson was pregnant, Marcus said, watching the warden's reaction carefully. Raven Paulson turned pale. Her fingers gripped the file folder so tightly that her knuckles turned white. That's impossible, she said quietly but firmly. We have the strictest controls. Women's block inmates have no contact with male inmates. That's why we're here, Miss Paulson, Chanel replied. We need a complete list of all the men who have had access to Cell Block C in the last 2 months. Security guards, maintenance staff, administration, everyone. Paulson nodded silently, still trying to comprehend the information. The word pregnant hung in the air between them, heavy and accusing. I'd also like to have another chat with Tamika Brookson, Marcus added, and with Guard Washington. Of course, Paulson pulled herself together. I'll make arrangements immediately. Washington should be on shift in an hour. Miss Brookson is in the laundry room, I'll call her. While Paulson gave her orders, the detectives returned to Letitia Jameson's cell. The tape marking the crime scene still blocked the entrance, but the inside was empty. The body had long since been taken away. Marcus slowly walked around the small space, examining each item again. What are you looking for? Chanel asked, watching him. I don't know myself, Marcus admitted. Something that might tell us more about her life, about who might have fathered the child. He stopped at a table where there were several photographs. One of them showed a young Letitia with a woman who looked like her, perhaps her sister. Another showed Letitia standing by the sea, smiling, the wind ruffling her hair. Marcus took the third photo, of Letitia sitting in some cafe, a tall glass of cocktail in front of her. She looked happy, carefree, not at all like the woman they'd found hanging from a makeshift noose. It's hard to imagine that she wanted to die, Marcus said quietly, putting the photograph back where it belonged. Chanel, meanwhile, was examining Letitia's few personal belongings stacked in a small nightstand. Cheap lip gloss, a comb with a few hairs stuck in it, a tube of hand cream, a stack of letters tied with a rubber band. May I see that? Chanel looked at Marcus. Go ahead, he nodded. There might be something in there about a romantic relationship. Chanel untied the rubber band and started looking through the envelopes. Most of them were labeled with dates 2 or 3 years old, with the sender's address, Naomi Jameson, apparently the same cousin who occasionally visited Letitia. While Chanel was going through the letters, Marcus noticed something under the bed. He bent down and pulled out a small paperback notebook. What's in it? Chanel asked, taking a break from the letters. Marcus opened the notebook. Inside were notes in neat, rounded handwriting. It looks like a diary. He flipped through several pages. The last entry was dated the day before yesterday. Chanel walked over and peered over her partner's shoulder. Together, they read the last entry. D is on duty again today. Said he'd bring the book I asked for. Can't wait to see you again. He promised to talk about our future. Sometimes I can't believe this is happening to me. After so many years of emptiness, there is finally hope. He says he loves me. I believe him. I have to believe. D, Chanel said thoughtfully. Derek Washington? Very likely. Marcus carefully closed the notebook and tucked it away in a plastic evidence bag. It might explain who the baby's father is. And give a motive for the murder, Chanel added. A prison guard having an affair with an inmate finds out she's pregnant. That's not only job loss, but possible jail time. Let's not jump to conclusions, Marcus cautioned. Let's talk to Tamika Brookson first. Maybe she knows more. They left the cell and went to the interrogation room where Tamika was waiting. She looked even more tired today than she had yesterday. Her eyes were red, as if she had been up all night. Miss Brookson, Marcus began after they were seated. We have some new information we'd like to share with you. The autopsy revealed that Letitia was pregnant. Tamika looked up, her eyes flashed with something resembling fear, which quickly changed to grim determination. I thought so, she said quietly. She didn't say it directly, but there were hints. And she'd stopped trading her toiletries for cigarettes, said she was quitting smoking. Did you know about her relationship with any of the prison staff? Chanel asked bluntly. Tamika was silent for a long time, as if weighing something in her head. She trusted me, she finally said. I don't want to betray that trust even now. Miss Brookson, Marcus stepped forward, his voice softer. Letitia is dead, and it's very likely she was murdered. If you know anything about her relationship, it might help us find her killer. Tamika closed her eyes and took a deep breath. When she opened them again, there was determination in them. Washington, she said quietly. Derek Washington. They had started dating about 3 months ago. At first it was just talking. Then he started bringing her books that couldn't be gotten through the prison library. Then he started lingering outside her cell during night shifts. Did she give you any details? Marcus asked, trying to keep his tone neutral. Not everything, but enough. Tamika looked down at the desk. They used the locker room at the end of the block. Sometimes the storage room next to the laundry room. Letitia said she was in love with him, that he'd promised to help her with her parole, and then they'd be together. Had she told him she was pregnant? Chanel asked. She was going to, Tamika looked up. That day when she was found. She told me she was going to tell him at night, that it would change everything. She was happy, you know? Said the baby was their chance at a real family. And you believe that's what Washington wanted too? There was doubt in Chanel's voice. I don't know, Tamika answered honestly. I warned her that it might be just a distraction for him, that he might be scared, but she was sure he loved her. Marcus exchanged a quick glance with Chanel. Thank you for your candor, Miss Brookson. It's very helpful to the investigation. Do you think he killed her? Tamika asked her bluntly. When she told him about the baby? We're considering all the possibilities, Marcus replied diplomatically. Do you have any reason to suspect him? Tamika shook her head slowly. No, it's just, Letitia couldn't kill herself. No way. Especially now that she had a reason to live. After talking to Tamika, the detectives decided to talk to Washington immediately. They headed to the administration office to see if he had arrived for his shift. Raven Paulson looked even more tense than before. Washington was supposed to show up half an hour ago, but he still hasn't shown up and isn't answering his cell phone. That's not like him. Can you give us his home address? Marcus asked, already sensing something bad. Sure. Paulson quickly wrote the address on a piece of paper. Detective Wilkerson, I have to ask, do you suspect him of anything in particular? We have reason to believe that Mr. Washington may have had a personal relationship with Letitia Jameson, Marcus replied, watching Paulson's face stretch in surprise. Impossible, she responded automatically. Derek is one of our best employees. He has an impeccable reputation. Yet we have evidence, and the fact that he didn't show up for work immediately after Jameson's death only reinforces our suspicions. Paulson slumped helplessly in her chair. If this is true, it's a disaster for our institution. Scandal, scrutiny, maybe even lawsuits from the Jameson family. The most important thing now is to get to the truth, Miss Paulson, Marcus said firmly. We're going to Washington's house. Please let us know if he shows up here. They quickly left the prison and headed for the address Paulson had given them. Derek Washington lived in a modest one-story house in a suburb of Phoenix, in a neighborhood populated mostly by middle-class families. Small, neat yard, mowed lawn, no frills, the home of a man who lived alone and spent most of his time at work. They drove up to the house and noticed that the garage was open but empty inside. The car's gone, Chanel noted. Maybe he's already escaped. Let's check the house just in case. Marcus got out of the car and headed for the front door. He pressed the bell, but there was no answer. After a minute, he knocked, but again there was silence. "I'll go around and check the backyard," Chanel said. Marcus nodded and continued trying to reach out. A few minutes later, Chanel returned. "No back entrance, just a small patio with a barbecue, no sign of the presence." "Looks like he really escaped." Marcus rubbed his chin. "We should put out a bolo." At that moment, his cell phone rang. It was Captain Taylor. "Wilkerson," Marcus answered. "I have information on your case." The captain's voice was strained. "The patrolman spotted a car registered to Derek Washington. It looks like he's trying to leave the state." "We're on our way," Marcus answered quickly. "Send the exact coordinates." They rushed to the car. Chanel got behind the wheel and they sped off with sirens and flashers on. "He's heading west," Marcus said, reading the dispatcher's message. "Probably trying to get to California." "He won't make it." Chanel pushed the gas pedal to the floor. Their car sped through the streets of Phoenix, maneuvering between cars that were hurriedly giving way to a police car. 15 minutes later, they pulled onto the interstate highway. The dispatcher gave regular updates on the location of Washington's car. "He's 10 miles ahead," Marcus reported without taking his eyes off the road. "And there are 2 patrol cars approaching him from the west." Chanel gripped the steering wheel tighter, focusing on the road. The car was being carried at the highest possible speed, but she maintained complete control, skillfully avoiding other vehicles. "Patrol's ready to set up a blockade at exit 161, Marcus said. "We need to come up on the east side to block his way back." "Okay," Chanel nodded, picking up speed. Soon they saw a cluster of flashing lights of police cars ahead. The patrolman had blocked off 2 lanes of traffic, leaving only one, forcing all cars to slow down for inspection. "There he is," Marcus exclaimed, pointing to a gray sedan that braked sharply in front of the blockade and then began to make a U-turn right on the highway. "He's trying to turn around." Chanel turned the steering wheel sharply, blocking the available lane. Derek Washington, seeing that the way was cut off on all sides, tried to go around the blockade on the side of the road, but his car ran into the spikes specially placed by the patrolman. There was a pop, the car skidded, and came to a stop, hitting the barrier. Marcus and Chanel instantly jumped out of their car, drawing their weapons. "Phoenix Police!" Marcus shouted. "Get out of the car with your hands up!" For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then the door slowly opened, and Derek Washington stepped out, holding his hands in plain sight. His face was contorted with fear and fatigue. In his eyes, the doom of a man who knows there is nowhere else to run. "On your knees, hands on your head," Chanel commanded, slowly approaching with her gun at the ready. Washington obeyed without resistance. Marcus approached and quickly cuffed him, spelling out the suspect's rights. "Derek Washington, you are under arrest on suspicion of the murder of Letitia Jameson." Washington didn't resist as he was lifted up and led toward the police car. His shoulders were slumped, his head bowed low, the posture of a man who had already surrendered. Back to Phoenix, they drove in heavy silence. Washington sat in the back seat, separated from the detectives by a partition, and stared out the window with an unseeing gaze. Occasionally, he sighed softly, but he did not utter a word the whole way. At the police station, Washington was led into an interrogation room, a small room with gray walls, a table and 3 chairs. He sat hunched over and stared at his hands, still handcuffed. Marcus and Chanel watched him for a while through the one-way mirror. "What do you think?" Marcus asked. "He's clearly broken," Chanel replied. "The failed escape attempt only confirms his guilt. I think he might confess if the interrogation is handled properly." "I agree. Let's not push too hard at first. Let him tell his side of the story." They went into the interrogation room. Marcus sat down across from Washington. Chanel remained standing by the door with her arms crossed over her chest. "Mr. Washington," Marcus began, turning on the recorder and announcing the date, time, and persons present for the record. "Do you understand why you are here?" Derek slowly looked up. "Yes," he said so quietly that Marcus barely heard. "Do you wish to make a statement?" Derek closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them again. "I loved her," he said. "I really did love her. It wasn't just fun." "Tell us about your relationship with Letitia Jameson," Marcus asked softly. Derek took a deep breath. "We met about a year ago. At first it was just talk. She was different. Not like the other inmates. Educated, thoughtful. We often discussed books we'd both read." He paused as if gathering his thoughts. "Then I started bringing her books that weren't in the prison library. It was forbidden, of course, but it seemed like such a minor offense. Then we started talking about more personal things, our lives, our dreams. And then one night, it just happened. You became intimate with an inmate, Chanel clarified, her voice neutral, without judgment. Yes, Derek lowered his head. I knew it was wrong, that I was risking my career, my reputation, but I couldn't stop. The more time we spent together, the stronger my feelings became. Tell us what happened, Marcus asked softly. Derek took a deep breath, as if gathering his strength. I was doing my rounds that night, as usual. There was no one around, so I stopped by her cell. We talked through the observation window. She seemed, agitated. Said she had important news but wanted to tell me in person. I opened the cell and stepped inside. He paused again, gathering his thoughts. She said she was pregnant, that we were having a baby. I panicked. All I could think about was being arrested, going to jail, my life ruined. I told her she had to get rid of the baby, that it was impossible. She got angry, said she loved me, that she thought I loved her too, that the baby was our chance at happiness. Derek's voice shook. We started to argue. I said she didn't understand that this was the end of my career, my life. She raised her voice. I panicked that someone would hear. I put my hand over her mouth. She started to struggle. I didn't want to hurt her. I just wanted her to shut up. But she kept fighting back, and then His voice broke. I grabbed her neck, just wanted her to calm down. But she kept struggling, and I just kept squeezing harder and harder, and then she stopped moving. Tears rolled down Derek's face. By the time I realized she wasn't breathing, it was too late. I panicked. I thought I might be faking a suicide. I ripped her sheet, made a noose, hung her up. Then I went out, closed the cell, and went on my rounds as if nothing had happened. Came back a couple hours later and discovered the body. He looked up, his eyes full of tears. I didn't want to kill her. I loved her. I was just scared. Marcus and Chanel listened to this confession in silence. Despite their experience with murderers, the tragedy of the situation did not leave them indifferent. Mr. Washington, Marcus finally said, is this a formal confession to the murder of Letitia Jameson? Yes, Derek answered quietly. I killed her, and I deserve to be punished. After the interrogation was completed, Guard Washington was taken to a holding cell. Officer Leroy Jenkins, a stout man with 20 years of police experience, snapped the handcuffs on Derek's wrists and led him down a gray hallway lit by harsh fluorescent lights. The former prison guard walked with his head down, not resisting or trying to speak. His legs, as if filled with lead, could barely move. Marcus Wilkerson and Chanel Davenport remained in the interrogation room. Chanel walked over to the table and gathered up the documents and photographs spread out on it. Evidence that was now unnecessary after the suspect's confession. Do you think he's telling the truth? She asked, folding the papers neatly into a folder. Marcus rubbed his eyes tiredly. Why would he lie about something like this? The story sounded plausible. Panic, an argument, an unintentional murder, an attempt to cover his tracks. We've seen it dozens of times. Yeah, you're right, Chanel nodded. It's just, I don't know. I feel sorry for both of them. Such a senseless tragedy. All tragedies are senseless, Marcus said philosophically, especially those that could have been avoided. They left the interrogation room and headed for the exit of the station. On the way, they met Captain Jakery Taylor, who was walking toward them with a cup of coffee in his hand. Well, did you close the case? He asked, stopping. Yes, sir, Marcus replied. Washington confessed. The murder occurred after the prisoner told him she was pregnant. He panicked, strangled her, then staged a suicide. Taylor nodded slowly. Good work, detectives. Quick and clean. Will there be a trial? Not likely, Chanel said. Given the confession and the circumstances, there's likely to be a plea bargain. Manslaughter, 10 to 15 years. I see. The captain sipped his coffee. Well, East Valley Prison is going to have a tough time of it. Scandal, investigation, possible lawsuit from the victim's family. I don't envy that Paulson. Everyone has their own problems, Marcus shrugged. We needed to find the killer, and we found him. Right, Taylor agreed. Get some rest today. The report can wait until tomorrow. Thank you, Captain, the detectives replied in unison. They went outside. The evening Arizona sun colored the sky a fiery red, creating bizarre silhouettes against the Phoenix cityscape. Marcus inhaled deeply, as if trying to clear his lungs of the stale air of the police station. Case closed, he said tiredly as he looked away from the passing patrol car. Another story of fear and impulsive violence for our archives. Yes, but no less tragic, Chanel said, shaking her head. Two people who thought they had found love in the most hopeless place, and it ended in death. Too bad about the baby, Marcus added. He hadn't even made it into the world. They walked leisurely through the parking lot, stretching out the last few minutes of the workday. Around them, the city lived its usual life. Cars honking in the evening traffic, people hurrying home after work, music playing in the nearest cafe. They drove off in different directions. Marcus turned on the radio, trying to drown out thoughts of Letitia Jameson and Derek Washington with the music. Another tragedy in the long list of human mistakes and unfulfilled hopes they had to deal with in their work. Chanel, sitting in traffic on Main Street, looked at the people passing by and thought about the fact that each of them carried their own story, their own secrets. How many of them are like Derek Washington? People whose lives had been derailed in an instant by one impulsive decision made in a state of panic. She didn't know the answer, and she didn't want to know. And back at East Valley Prison, life went on as usual. Inmates ate dinner in the mess hall, guards made their evening rounds, and the administration prepared for the inevitable questions and inspections that would follow the scandal. Tamika Brookson sat on her bunk, going through the few things Letitia had been allowed to take. A few books, photographs, cheap jewelry. Among them was a small notebook with a tattered cover, the same one Letitia had used as a diary. Tamika knew the investigators had already looked through it, but perhaps they had overlooked what was really important. She flipped through the pages slowly, reading her dead friend's notes. They contained the entire story of her affair with Derek, from the first conversations and shy touches to the passionate meetings in the secluded corners of the prison. Letitia wrote sincerely, hiding neither her feelings nor her fears. On the last page, dated the day before she died, Tamika found an entry that made her shudder. Tomorrow, everything will change. I will tell Dee the truth about the baby. I don't know how he'll react, but I can't hide it anymore. We can be a real family, I know it. We just have to get through the night.